So yeah, I just want to talk about this new artwork I've made, which I'm calling Symmetry/Identity. These are just two words that kept popping into my mind while making it. It's again a mostly improvised piece, like I usually do. I wanted to try something a little bit different in the way that I wanted some more organic shapes, just something to practice modeling a bit more, because I'm so used to doing all the typical kind of modular sci-fi stuff, which is just a lot of repeating elements, and there are of course a lot of repeating elements in this, but I wanted to try fusing in some almost ancient and or Art Deco elements. It's a kind of field that I've never really explored when it comes to shapes, and I think there's a lot of potential there. So it was quite fun to play with this, especially fun practicing subdivision modeling for intricate details. So for example, with the top of the column here, getting all these swirls and curves and turning it into an actual top detail piece that could be reusable, figuring out where exactly to place vertices and how to connect them together. Because typically when I do subdivision modeling, it's usually just an extension of box modeling and trying to push things into shape, and I never really do anything that intricate with it. So this was quite interesting. Speaking of which, I'd love to do some kind of jewelry modeling at some point. That's actually an idea that I had for future versions of the Modular Metals pack. I want to use some jewelry examples. Anyway, I digress. This piece is supposed to represent a collection of things. Now when I make artwork like this, I always think to myself, well, I have ideas in my mind for what it means, but I don't want to tell that to people because I feel like, they should be able to make their own interpretations. Symmetry has always been something that plays quite a big part in my work. Symmetry versus asymmetry is a term that I think about quite a lot, where things are almost entirely symmetrical except for some key details. So I like to think that people can sometimes spot the difference with pieces of my artwork like this, and perhaps those differences will have unique meanings to them. So for details of the render, it was rendered in cycles, which you can probably tell from all of the emissive lighting going on. The final renders came out to 3840 by 2160 in resolution. The rigged characters in this come from my rigged character base model pack, which is available in the $5 tier of the Patreon. I mentioned this new base male model in the previous video as well. One of the more interesting parts to model in this was the back column there, because the top detail area was done separately from the actual cylinder. It crossed my mind that I've never done these subtractive curved top insets into columns before, and I have no idea why, because they're so easy to make and they can make cylinders just look so much more interesting. So if you want to know, take a cylinder with a radius of any number of vertices, put an edge loop somewhere in there. Then if you take the vertices that comprise the edge loop, then press Ctrl, Shift and B to bevel the vertices, move your cursor away to bring them out a bit, and then scroll up. You'll make a curve out of the vertices. Then say we take the bottom section, select all of the faces that go around the cylinder. Then we're going to inset. If you press I, you'll notice that it's insetting all of them at once, which isn't what we want. We want to press I a second time, so we'll inset those faces independently. Then you can click to set that new geometry. And then from here, press Alt-E, extrude faces along normals, and then you can bring them inwards. Then if you like to add a bit more curvature, you can bevel these new faces again with Ctrl-B, not Ctrl-Shift-B, because we're actually beveling the faces. So drag the cursor to bring this in a bit, and you can of course scroll forwards and backwards to control the number of vertices which make up that curve. So if you take a look, that's just an extremely simple and fast way to get these lovely details around a cylinder. So there's a tip if you want to make any simple ancient Greek or Roman style columns. The top detail piece of the column was quite difficult to get right, because it's all one object. So not only do we need to have the flat face, but we need to have these border details which are extruded outwards. It would have probably been easier making the back face first, and then using the knife tool perhaps to draw on the border details and extrude them out. But I guess I did it the harder way, which was making the border first, and then having to retro model on a back face afterwards. And then from there it was a point of, how do we have this thing be symmetrical and extruded backwards? Should we place a cylinder in between and try and connect up the vertices I've already made with it? And I thought, no, that'd be a bit too messy. So I just used a mirror modifier to take what I had already made and copy it to the other side of the column. And then I would link up the vertices between these manually. That sounds simple, but it was a little bit tricky when the curve came all the way back around again, constantly popping in and out of the X-ray mode just to be able to select the vertices appropriately. But in the end, I think the result was quite nice. I think it was good practice. I think I might put together a collection of little details like this so I can reuse them again in the future. Just like kit bashing. I'm really happy that I set up IK rigs for all of my base characters because it just makes it so much easier to pose them now. And there are lots of resources on YouTube, especially if you want to learn how to set up inverse kinematics for your rigs. So I might show some on the screen now. Ooh, look at all those resources. Maybe you should go and check them out. I actually ended up doing two versions of this artwork when it comes to looking at the final result. One of them was kind of stylized and one of them was a bit more reflective and metallic, which I call the shiny version, like a shiny Pokemon, I guess. The stylized version is done in a way that I kind of do a lot of artwork, which is where I'm just literally using plain RGB values with, I guess, just a principled shader. And then I'll use ambient occlusion to kind of darken the inner areas. So it's almost kind of comic booky in a way. Maybe not comic booky, what's the word I'm looking for? Posterized? No, not really. but it's stylized, you know what I mean? I like using plain RGB values because I feel like sometimes texture data can ruin a scene if it's not appropriate. Also, depending on whether you're going stylized or realistic textures can become dated really quickly. And I feel like because I'm quite reactive to color in terms of emotional response, I like having things that are kind of plain yet vibrant because it's more stimulating for me to look at. But I guess everyone has a personal preference there. For the metallic version, I took one of the nodes from my modular metals pack and basically applied it just to see what would happen with very few changes, just color. And honestly, I quite like the reflectivity. It's clearly not super realistic, but it does look metallic. It's kind of sci-fi, but again, it's got this ancient vibe to it, and that's something that I really want to key into. And I feel like I might do more exploration of this in future projects. I guess the word I'm looking for is timelessness. And I guess just because shape motifs existed in the past, it doesn't mean they can't be reapplied to the future. Like the past doesn't have ownership over certain shapes, if that makes sense. So I feel like it's good territory to explore, and I'd like to see more people doing artwork that blends shapes like this. Okay, so here's a question. Have you spotted the hidden logo in the image? I'm sure some of you have. If you look up here, that's just on the top of the column, but no, that's not the one I mean. That's the obvious one. The less obvious one is the background itself, the column forming the center bar, and the almost Stargate-like ring forming the outer border. It would be the logo rotated 90 degrees. Of course, for the color, I've gone for my favorite combination. This is something that has of course been mentioned on the channel before, and it's become a little bit of a meme within my community. Blues and purples, those are now Curtis colors. Again, because they provide me with the most stimulation when looking at artwork. And I like the term eye candy because it kind of feels like that sometimes. Like when I feel like getting a bit of stimulation, just look at something vibrant and colorful. So by making stuff like this, I'm kind of producing my own eye candy. But I did try playing with other colors as well. I was kind of planning on doing a blue versus red version. And this would be representative of maybe personality differences. There were also lots of ideas for other versions of the artwork as well. For example, given the whole pandemic going on, people separated by the global situation. So there'd be details relating to the pandemic scattered around the scene. Alternatively, people separated over the internet. So there'd be a digitized version. For these kind of floral wavy elements on the side, I didn't spend too much time on them. I literally thought, okay, how quick can you make something with sub-D modeling that looks kind of acceptable and still looks kind of abstract and almost just like a pattern? So I just started pulling vertices around, making these kind of zigzag edges and grabbing every other line of edges and moving them backwards to get the wavy effect. Obviously, they're not super detailed, but from a distance, I think they make a pretty nice pattern. And it breaks up the monotony of the kind of right-angled shapes that are more central to the scene, like these rectangles coming in at a slanted angle from the background circle. Now, I've done a lot of fanboying over emissive lighting in the past on this channel, but just taking a look at the surface of these characters, this is one of the reasons why I love it so much, because it's so reactive. It just bleeds light into the scene, and it can react on surfaces in ways that you didn't really expect. So depending on your setup, you can get some just really beautiful reflections. Okay, so if you look from the side, you can notice that things look further away from each other than they might seem through the camera's perspective. Part of this is because when I'm using the ambient occlusion to add color variation to objects, it really depends on their distance from each other, obviously because that's how ambient occlusion is calculated. So for example, these back vertical bars on the background here, they're much further away than they look on the camera. That's because if they were super close, they'd be a bit too dark. So that's another thing I've been playing with, like proximity versus color versus light in a way. Anyway, as per usual, this artwork is available on my Patreon under the 3rd tier, which gets you access to my personal art files, which are completed and experimental projects. But yeah, I just wanted to make a quick note that this is something I've made. If you find yourself ever making something similar to this, maybe experimenting with Art Deco or ancient shapes or emissive lighting, symmetry and symbolism, then feel free to show me and tag me in your work. I love seeing the different things that people can make. So yeah, thanks for listening to my rambling. Have a nice day, everyone, and stay safe. I'm getting cramp. Oh no, I think this is the first time I'm getting cramp during a recording. My foot.